It's not very often that I get a call from someone wanting to buy equipment. What I mean by that is that most times I'll sell what I have already fixed and not what I haven't. Which means I get a chance to pick the customer's brain and figure out what they really want, which is very different from my normal role as a repair guy. And if you guessed it by that introduction, this trimmer was a request by a friend of mine, and you'll never guess the reason why they want it. In today's video, we're going to take a look at this Weedeater brand string trimmer, and the problem is that, well, I need to get it ready for a good friend of mine. I've had this trimmer in my warehouse for some time now, and I don't know much about it, but hopefully it won't give me too much grief when we try to fix it. Now the big question is, why are they asking me to get something ready for them in the middle of summer? Well, they said they're tired of using battery electric equipment. That's right, they're coming back to gasoline. Now, I'm going to try and repair this trimmer, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So yes, you heard me right earlier. They said they had made the switch over to a battery electric string trimmer and even a leaf blower, but have come to the conclusion that a lot of people have, that batteries are not the answer, at least not right now. You might also be wondering, why would anyone leave a battery trimmer only to come back to an underpowered Weedeater brand trimmer? And the answer is a limited budget. Now, I did offer them a couple of different brands to choose from, but in the end, their budget only allowed for this choice. Now, there's nothing wrong with choosing one of these. In fact, I use one of these myself despite having better brands to pick from. Now, the first thing that I want to do is to look over the trimmer and see if there's anything terribly wrong with it. And for the most part, it's in really good condition. However, it's not without an issue though. If I carefully try and squeeze the trigger, you can see that it's not moving like it should be. And if we look at the lever the cable's attached to on top of the carb, you can see that it wants to move, but it simply can't. And what this means is that more than likely, the shaft that the throttle plate is attached to is stuck. Now, even though this part is stuck, I still want to try and see if we can get the engine started, otherwise we may have more problems to deal with. So unfortunately, it did not start, which is never a good way to begin a project. Now, if we take a look at the starting instructions on the filter cover, you can see that it says we need to squeeze the trigger while trying to start this engine. That means I'll need to try and break the throttle free, otherwise it's unlikely that we'll be able to start the engine. And luckily, it didn't take that much to break it free, which means we'll now be able to try and start it again, and hopefully it'll start this time. Well, that wasn't the best test start I've ever had, but at least it started and ran for a short time. That means this engine is not worn out and has enough compression to run, which is a big deal when talking about a 2-cycle engine. Of course, it also means we have a working ignition system, but as you'll see here in a bit, that's going to come back and haunt us. Now, the fuel that came out of the tank was a bit heavy with oil, but that could be because it's old and some of the gasoline has already evaporated, leaving the oil behind. Also, after inspecting the fuel filter, it's still connected to the fuel line in the tank, which is good news because it means the fuel lines are still in good condition. The next thing I want to do is to just pour in some of my own freshly mixed fuel and then try starting it. You never know, it might just start and run. But with my luck, I doubt that's going to happen. However, if it does work out, it means that my friend will get back to using a gasoline machine sooner than later. So it looks like it wants to run, but it's having a tough time, but you can't blame it. This is probably the first time it's ran in who knows how long. Now this time it seemed to want to stay running a lot longer. However, what was really happening was that I was keeping the throttle partially open to keep it running that way. So instead of having to do that, I'll just turn the idle screw clockwise a bit and that should fix it. Well, it did better, only this time I moved the choke lever to the run position, which basically allows more air to get to the engine, but then there wasn't enough fuel to keep it going. That means I think this trimmer is in working condition and it only needs a tiny bit of fuel adjustment to get it to work like it's supposed to. However, this does bring up a bigger question though, because the proper thing to do would be to go through the carb and find out if there are any issues with it before we start to adjust it, but I don't see it that way. Okay, so hear me out. If we had put fuel into the tank and the machine didn't start or was struggling to run, then yes, I'd recommend that we inspect the carb first. But that's not what happened on this machine. It started, and even though it was not perfect, it was much better than expected, which means a small fuel adjustment is all that's needed, at least for right now. I know it might sound like I'm just guessing as to which ones I need to tear into, while others I seem to just make a couple of turns on some adjustment screws. But believe me, it's taken quite a long time of doing this kind of work to figure out when I need to tear into it and when I don't have to. Before I continue, I noticed that the guard was poorly installed on the trimmer head, so I'll just take it off and reinstall it, but the right way. I know a lot of people take theirs off, but for me, I don't like getting hit in the legs or face with sticks and rocks. Of course, it is your machine and your face, so do what you want with yours, but as for me, I'm keeping it on. Now, I'm not going to guarantee that my friend is going to keep it on there either, but I really don't have any say in it, so it's kind of out of my hands. Now, the cutter on the guard isn't terrible, but I would like to put a better edge on it, that way it'll trim the line a whole lot easier. Of course, you can sharpen it with it still on the guard, but I don't want to risk damaging the guard in any way, so I'm going to take it off to sharpen it. Now, you don't have to make it razor sharp, but if it is kind of dull, then sharpening it will make it work a whole lot better. So to be able to turn the fuel adjustment screws on this particular carb, I'll need to use a special tool, and for this one, I'll need the spline version, but yours might be different. Now, the screws are on the front of the carb, and the one that's on the left closer to the engine is the L screw, and it's for low-speed fuel adjustment, which also includes starting the engine. That means the screw to the right closer to the air filter is the H screw, and it's for adjusting fuel while the engine is at full speed. You'll also have to make a few adjustments to the idle screw because making changes to the L screw will affect how the engine idles, so you might have to compensate for it. I'm also going to take the filter cover off to make filming the adjustments a little bit easier to see. And according to how this engine was acting when we first tried to start it, I think it needs more fuel, so I'll start by giving it a half turn counterclockwise. So unfortunately, it's not doing anything, which is really strange when compared to how easily it started before. I'll try that again and see if we get the same result. Now, by the way it's not doing anything, I'm beginning to think that we just lost spark. Of course, to test out that idea, I could just pull out my spark tester, but I have a better idea that doesn't require any extra tools. I'll just pop out the kill switch and then disconnect one of the wires and then try starting it again. If it works, it means we have spark and that the kill switch needs to be looked at. Now, as you just saw, all I had to do to stop the engine was to touch the connector to the prong instead of using the switch. This is of course not how it's supposed to work. It should not have stopped when the connector made contact with the prong on the switch. It should have stopped when I pressed on the rocker instead. Now, if you didn't know it, this switch is normally open, and when you press on the rocker, it'll complete the circuit and ground the coil, and the engine should stop. What that means is the switch is making contact when it shouldn't be, and we'll need to see why it's doing that. And after taking it apart, there's only a curved copper strip that's supposed to make momentary contact inside the body of the switch. So what I ended up doing was bending the strip just a bit more than it already was, then reinstalling it. I'm also going to clean the body of the switch out just to make sure that there's nothing in there that's conductive and completing the circuit. Now after letting it dry a bit, I'll then carefully install the rocker into the body and then put it back into the machine. Now I could have checked it with my multimeter to make sure, but I'm very certain that this was the problem and that what I did will fix it, otherwise I'll just buy a new switch. And if you wanted to replace your switch because you don't want to mess with it like I did, I totally understand how you feel about it. Now a new switch is about $8, which I think is a little too much, but then again, nothing is cheap nowadays. But my take on it is that it's already broken, so how much more can I break it? Well, we're about to find out if what I did fixed it or made it worse. Well, it looks like that slight bend we made in the copper piece was enough to get it not to make contact when it wasn't supposed to. Now I can't guarantee that it's going to work on your switch, but I'm very certain that disconnecting it to test if it is the issue will work though. Just remember, if the trimmer won't start even after disconnecting the wire, you're still going to have to do more testing to find out the reason why. I can only guess, but the problem with the switch was probably the reason why this trimmer was given away in the first place. But luckily, at least for us, this trimmer only required a small amount of work, and this was one of the few times where the carb wasn't the issue. And yes, I could have replaced the fuel lines if I wanted to, but to be honest, they're still in great shape and should last for another couple of seasons. I know this brand is not everyone's choice for a string trimmer, but to be honest, unless you intend on using it as a brush cutter, these work well for a city lot and not a farm. So my question is, have you ever considered that a bad switch on your machine might be the cause for it to work one day and not the next? This is probably only my second time to come across it, so I doubt you'll ever have to deal with it, but you never know. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.